Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. Listen to that. Does that ring a bell? The resident hoodlum himself, David Cohen, with Douglas Viviani. David, what do you think?
Yes, definitely rings a bell.
It does ring a bell. I'll tell you why. Because that is one of the, if not the, groundbreaking show.
Absolutely, one of the first shows of the quote unquote golden era.
86 episodes later, it changed the landscape of television and launched the careers of endless writers, producers.
I
right?
love when you ad-lib. It's so natural.
Yeah, you like that? We have a special guest today who is perfectly fitted for Everything Old is New Again's discussion of and look back to The Sopranos. David Cohen, who is our guest? What's up with this?
Wait, let me just find his name. Oh, yeah. No, Terrance Winter's with us again. He's been on the show before. We're always so happy to have him on talking about his current projects, but especially today when we're talking about the 20-year anniversary of Sopranos. So welcome, Terry, back to the show.
Very happy to be here. Good morning, guys.
All right, it's great. Good morning for you. Good afternoon for us. You're now across
I'm in LA.
Yes, you're across the country now. 3,000 miles away. We miss you in New York. Have you been back to New York since you've moved there?
Yeah, we promised our kids that they could go back regularly and visit their friends, but it was really more for us because we want to go back and visit our friends and go and see family and eat great food. So we make it a point to visit every couple of months. So we've been back a bunch of times.
That's great to hear.
And most recently for a lot of the 20th anniversary festivities for The Sopranos. So
yes.
Really
How does it feel? It's been 20 years. Does it feel like it's been since yes? I mean, you've done a lot since. You've been executive producer and award winner, writer, producer for the Boardwalk Empire series as well as vinyl. So you've done many other things. But the question is, it's been 20 years. Do you think? How do you look back on it? Those years where you've not been in the writers' room for The Sopranos?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, to see the number 20 years, it's mind-boggling. You can't believe it's been that long. But then when you put it in the context that you just did, where you say, "Oh, look at all the stuff you've done," you say, "Oh, okay, I guess it has been because it would have taken that long to do all that." But it really feels like yesterday. And being in that room, that writers' room, was the high point of my career. I mean, that was the thing that I will judge everything else I ever do by, was that experience. And not just because it was a huge hit show. It was a magic time for me, just getting to work on something I was so proud of and so happy to do, and to get to work with David Chase and Matt Weiner and Robin Green and Mitch Burgess and Andy and Diane, Andy Schneider and Diane Froloff. Just the, it was like the Yankees, just being part of that group was just phenomenal.
Did you ever think that, when you were in St. John's Law School, that thereafter you would win lots of awards, but, 3 Producer Guild Awards, 4 Writers Guild of America Awards, 4 Emmys, nominated for an Academy Award for Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, I know you don't write for the awards, but the accolades and the acknowledgement from people in your industry abound. And I just wonder what you think of that when you look back. Of course,
I would have been embarrassed to even say I fantasized about that stuff because it felt so outlandish, to think. I mean, just the idea of writing for a living, to people, particularly people not from L.A. If you grow up in L.A., you know a lot of people in the industry, so it's not crazy to say I want to be in the film industry. Chances are your neighbor is an editor, your guy across the street, might be a writer. In New York, as you guys well know, you don't really grow up, and particularly when we grew up, you didn't grow up around a lot of people in the entertainment business. So it sounded kind of ridiculous to say, I want to grow up and be a TV writer. Even to the point, I remember when I was in law school, my roommate, a friend of mine, and I were sitting watching TV, and we were in our first year of law school, and we were watching TV one night, and he said to me, if you could do anything in the world, what would it be, for a career? Now, you would hope asking somebody who's in law school, you would hope the answer would be a lawyer.
Right.
But we were already plotting our escape from that. And he goes, so you could be anything you wanted. What would it be? And I kind of sheepishly showed my hand, and I admitted. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I'd be a writer for David Letterman. And he said, come on, something realistic. And I remember thinking, even my fantasy isn't realistic. I can't even dream about it. It's so stupid. And I was already thinking, like, wow, I wonder if I could do this. And I was thinking, God, you can't even dream about this. It's so stupid. And then when I finally did it, I mean, it was really, it was a big leap, but it was exhilarating. When I finally got out here and made the move in 1991, I had graduated from law school, spent 2 years as an attorney, hated every second of it, and I'm sure they hated me every second of it. And I moved out here, and it was exhilarating because finally, for the first time in my life, I had a clear purpose, something that I really knew I wanted to do, and I was absolutely focused on. I mean, Doug, you remember me from law school, and I think focus is not exactly a word that would come to mind to describe my demeanor, But when I got out here, I was lived, breathed, and ate writing and getting into this business, and I still do. It's finally the true thing that I wanted to do. So,
well, as we've talked to in the past, and when you're doing something you love and want to do, you naturally become focused because it's something you love doing. So like I do this show. I prepare for the show with Dave and so forth, and we love sitting down and doing it. So it's a labor of love, so to speak, and it makes it something that makes psychologically an easy transition from whatever you're doing into what you love to do. Speaking of psychological, trying to transition here, one of the attractions, I think, and differences, initially at least, the hook for The Sopranos was a mob boss going to see a psychologist. And what could happen there? What does this person really think about? What does Don Corleone think about really behind the scenes, so to speak, and can discuss it with someone that has an obligation never to talk about what they talk about? When you heard about that, because I know you started in the second year of The Sopranos, was that somewhat of a different take and an attraction to you to the show at all? With that take, it sounds like it was, I think, totally different to the whole mob mentality of a work of art.
Yeah, well, it certainly is. Yeah, I mean, there have been. I'm pretty sure that Frank Costello, the famous gangster, saw a psychiatrist, so it wasn't without precedent. And I think certainly the idea of having that as a part of the series was really interesting to me because and it's funny too. We talk about like the dreams. He talks about his dreams, and that's of course a big thing. In therapy and psychology, that was always interesting to me. It's like because I always say sometimes people would complain about the dream sequences and the therapy stuff. They just wanted the pure, what they considered to be the pure gangster stuff. But I would always say, well, if you're interested in Tony Soprano, aren't you interested in what he dreams about or what he thinks about or what he's afraid of and that sort of stuff? So for me, that was always really fun to write and really interesting. It's also, as a writer, it's kind of in a selfish way, it sort of gives you the fact that you get a character that organically goes to see another character on the show and gets to talk about how he feels, sort of organically opens up, just a huge can of information in terms of what this person is about. He's actually going there to talk about what he feels, which is great. And I had been in therapy before. I think as all the writers, I went through that phase. You might remember where I thought I was a giraffe for a while, and then I had to go see a doctor about that. And I got over that.
Well, what was Tony's diagnosis? Was there a diagnosis ever in the working? I don't know, behind the scenes, that everyone said what his diagnosis would have been from Dr. Melfi?
We never saw Dr. Melfi's chart.
I'm sure there was, and I can't remember what it is. And it's funny, we early on in season 2, David Chase and I went to a panel that was given by several psychiatrists, each of whom presented papers about Tony Soprano as if he were a real patient, and talked about his narcissism and his relationship with his mother and the violence. And one of the papers talked about a study that was really persuasive and incredibly convincing, certainly to David, because we ended up using this on the show. The conclusion of this psychological paper that the person talked about basically came to was, you can't help certain people. There are people who are sociopathic, like Tony Soprano, who are beyond help. And ultimately, therapy sometimes enables them to be better gangsters, because you are providing them with the language to exculpate them from their behavior. So they'll say, oh, the reason I'm bad is because my mother did X, Y, and Z, or my father was never around, so that's why I'm a criminal. So you're actually not only helping them, but you're not only not helping them, but you're actually enabling them to be better at their job, because you're giving them a rationalization and a justification for all this horrible behavior. David heard that and he went, oh my God, that's how therapy ends for Tony. Melfi basically says, I can't, I've been wasting my time for all these years, and we ended up doing that. Basically, she ends up just going to her therapist and just says essentially just what I said. And it was a great, ironic button on that whole story.
How about that? And we're enjoying our time. We're not wasting our time here with Terry Winter, Emmy Award winner, writer of Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire, and so much more. We'll be back right after this to continue our celebration of the Sopranos on Everything Old is New Again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Holy great interview! Hi, this is Burt Ward, Robin from TV's Batman. You're listening to Douglas Viviani and David Cohen's fabulous radio show, Everything's Old is New Again. To the Batmobile, citizens.
Hi, this is Lee Merriweather. You're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Doug Viviani and David Cohen. They are great guys.
We're back. Everything Old is New Again, and we're showing off for our guest, Terry Winter, there.
That was, let me tell you.
I read Burt Ward's biography recently, which was pretty wild. I don't remember the name of it, but if you can pick it up, it's pretty fascinating behind the scenes look at what was going on the set of Batman. And suffice to say, those tights came off quite a bit. Those guys had groupies, like crazy amounts of groupies following, Adam West and Burt Ward around the country. They would do personal appearances, and apparently, they were two fairly young single guys, in 1966, and they, I won't give anything away, but it was a pretty interesting read.
Yeah, Burt was a little reluctant to go down that path with us. We tried to
prod him. Man, I couldn't
Yeah.
believe what I was reading. I was like, this is the boy wonder indeed, man. He was like, dude, wow.
All I could say, that return he did for us, that's probably the best return that any celebrity has done for us. Oh, and yours too, Terry. Sorry. So,
no, thank you.
Back to the subject at hand, The Sopranos. Terry, can you tell us a little bit about? You came in during season 2, so I sensed the feeling in the room was already, you've got this like breakout, major, groundbreaking hit on your hands. What was it like to walk into a situation that was already, this juggernaut for you?
It was exhilarating beyond belief, because I knew what a great show it was, and I knew in my heart I could do it. On the other hand, it was terrifying, because I thought if I screwed this up, people are going to look and say, well, what changed between season 1 and season 2? And they're going to quickly identify this new writer who came in and blew the whole thing out of the water. So I was really on pins and needles, hoping that what we were doing in season 2 was as well received as season 1 was. And, if awards mean anything as a metric, we actually got even more Emmy Award nominations in season 2 than we did the first season. So at least using that as a barometer, I was like, okay, I didn't screw it up if nothing else. So it was great. I mean, I kind of was on the show in a way, in spirit, even from the beginning. Very early on, when David was hiring his writing staff, my agent sent me the pilot episode of The Sopranos, which I watched immediately and flipped out over and called my agent and said, "You've got to get me on this show." The second call was to a very good friend of mine named Frank Rizzulli, who had actually given me my first job, along with two other writers named George Skank and Frank Cardia, who now run NCIS. Anyway, I called Frank and said, "Hey, have you seen the Sopranos thing?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm actually meeting with this guy, David Chase, on Friday." Frank had a very in-depth background in and around people liked the characters on The Sopranos in East Boston. He knew that world very well. And I said, God, you got to get me on that show with you. And he said, I'll do whatever I can. Unfortunately, Frank had been the last person David hired in season 1, so the door closed and I was out. But Frank would come home from work every day and call me and tell me what was going on in the writer's room, and we'd kick around. He'd tell me stories that he came up with, and I'd occasionally add something maybe, or he would send me things to edit for him, and can you proofread this? And occasionally I would add some dialogue, and it was actually getting it on the show. So I told David years later I was technically writing on the show even when I wasn't. But when season 2 came along, Frank finally was able to convince David to meet me. He gave me a freelance script to do, and the rest was history.
What was your first memory of okay, I have made now a significant contribution that's been recognized at a point where maybe you said, okay, I'm a made guy now on on the staff?
It probably took me, I'd say, till the end of to middle of season 3, where I was consistently delivering scripts that David really liked. By that point, like 5 or 6 in a row, that I was coming back, and he had pretty very, very little notes, very not a lot to say other than praise. That I was really, things were basically just getting shot as I was writing them, as opposed to being rewritten and story problems and that stuff. But I started to get more responsibility, covering the set, and basically, being asked more for my opinion about things. And it was, it took, I'd say, a good, almost till the end of season 3. By the time I wrote Pine Barrens, I'd say I was pretty firmly entrenched on the show. And then Pine Barrens was the first thing I wrote that got any kind of awards acclaim. No, actually, that's not true. I actually was shooting Pine Barrens. I was on the set. I remember being in the woods shooting Pine Barrens, and a PA came up to me and said, David Chase is on the phone. And we were literally using these like World War II walkie-talkies. They were giant. We were in the middle of nowhere with no cell reception. This was in I guess it was in 2000 maybe, and David called to tell me that I had just been nominated for a Writers Guild Award for the first episode I ever wrote for the show, and that was kind of mind blowing for me. So it was the episode that I wrote as a freelancer got nominated for an award, so that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Now, just springboarding off of the Pine Barrens episode, later on there was an episode, Two Tonys, where Christopher and Paulie retell the story of the Pine Barrens. Now, at that point, it's going to be obscure. Tony observes that Junior's house is like the Bowery Boys with secret codes. Is that Bowery Boys reference yours? Because you do a lot of pop culture references. Or was that David Chase?
I don't remember exactly, but I would say 99% that's my reference.
I would think so. Now, David Cohen and I have had a little bit of a argument you love to have about the Bowery Boys. To me lends to the question of you. I think we're a fan. How do we convince David Cohen that the Bowery Boys are worthwhile?
Oh, I mean, do you doubt it? Even having seen it, I mean, it's such a pure New York show. I mean, you couldn't, unless you're a New Yorker, you couldn't really understand these guys at all, or that whole, the camaraderie, the gang stuff. I mean, it's the kind of thing I think like every kid, certainly I wanted to be part of a gang like that were kind of, they weren't really bad, but they weren't good either, but they were lovable rogues who sort of saved the day. And, hey, hanging out in Louis' Sweet Shop every day, that doesn't sound bad either. So
right, especially later on when they were the Bowery Boys as opposed to the East Side Kids and all of that, when they
exactly. Yeah, well, that was, it's so funny. I mean, they definitely sort of went back and forth between being really bad kids, like in Angels with Dirty Faces, or I'm blanking on another movie they did, but where they were bad, and then ultimately became more of the lovable rogue types that I was just describing. But it's funny too. It's also that it's a really, you could sort of draw a straight line between the Bowery Boys and Sopranos in a lot of ways. In that gang mentality, that kind of Three Stooges, angry, Flip Mahoney is always kind of pissed off at everybody and annoyed, and he's kind of the tough boss, and the goofy guys in the gang. It's sort of very similar to a lot of gang mentality, and obviously there's big difference between people who are actually murdering other people and the stuff the Bowery Boys did.
But that is along the lines of Everything Old is New Again, in that you build upon the foundation of the Bowery Boys to come up with the Sopranos. I'm sure there's a master's degree there that someone can earn a PhD by describing all of that. That's
very true.
One quick question, because we have a few minutes here. Lots of episodes leave a few questions unanswered. There's some things that happen that aren't returned to, at least in that particular episode, and sometimes left, for the remainder of the series. I presume that was intentional, and if so, tell us why you did that.
Yeah, it was intentional in a lot of ways. David was very fond of a quote, and I don't know who said it, but he said, "Art asks questions, it doesn't give answers." And which I always loved, the idea that, you don't have to wrap every single thing up. And, it's sort of like, if following that idea that if art also imitates life, very often in life, things aren't, tidied up and you're given a complete answer to everything. He used to always say that, the function of network television is to reassure you that everything is okay, and that and also to buy our soap. We caught the murderer, he's going to jail, and you should buy this new car from GM. It just sort of makes you, it's this feel-good resolution all the time. And what we were doing often made you not feel the opposite of good. You felt very disconcerting. Sometimes you feel like, wow, the bad guys won. It's not all right. It's not going to be okay. Things don't work out. And that was sort of what we wanted to remind people, that was more, more akin to real life. And look, there's something great to be said about wish fulfillment. People go to romantic comedies to see the, boy and girl get together at the end, and certainly if you ever did one where they don't, people would be stamping their feet. And that's not the ticket I bought. I bought a ticket for the ride that ends with the happy ending. And, with our show, certainly, and things I've also tried to do, you're not necessarily going to get that, but hopefully you're entertained.
There you go. Now, I only have a minute and a half, so this is not fair, but there's lots of music in The Sopranos that have meaning, such as when Tony passes out. One episode, I think it was called House Arrest, where passes out from panic attack, and I think Boston is playing More Than a Feeling in the background. And I mean, is there in the script, intentionally, as you're preparing the script, do you say, I would like a song in this particular section of the script, or is that something that's done later?
The few times I did that, it was ignored. Because David was very, very jealously guarded the music. He absolutely loved choosing all the music. He and a guy named Martin Brucely, who was our music supervisor, would pick everything. So I learned early on, don't even bother suggesting a song, because that's David's favorite thing to do. He will go in later and figure out. Occasionally he'd have an idea for a song going into it, and I'll leave you with this tidbit. Going as we were about a year out from the finale, he came into the office one day and said, "God, I just heard Don't Stop Believing on the radio. There's something in there. There's something about that song." And a year later, of course, that became our finale.
So long story short, it was intentional, but it was David Chase's baby. He was able to do that. But I thought it was great.
Totally.
And so many of the times that it was done, it was very apropos to the particular scene or what was going on.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for the moment here. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again. Continue all things Terry Winter and The Sopranos on Everything Old is New Again.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, this is Alan Alda, and you're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again. This is Hal Linden inviting you to enjoy Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
And that's what you're doing, and we're here with David Cohen, Douglas Viviani, and, of course, Terrance Winter, who is the force behind, one of the major forces, let's say, behind The Sopranos and some of the best work therein. And it's a 20-year anniversary, and we're enjoying some time together. Once again, showing off for Terry with Alan Alda and Hal Linden, I'm sure favorites of yours from the the day.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually was lucky enough to meet Alan Alda in a restaurant a while back, a few years ago, and it was a real coincidence. I just happened to watch. It was actually when I was on Boardwalk Empire, and I watched a documentary about the world of burlesque and burlesque shows from like the 30s and 40s, and Alan Alda was in it, interviewed, talking about his dad, Robert Alda, who was early on in his career was sort of an MC at a lot of burlesque shows. So I had just happened to watch that documentary, and then the day later I ran into Alan Alda, and rather than just be a goofy fan, I was able to say, hey, I just saw you in this documentary, and he was like, oh wow, I didn't know that anybody would ever watch that thing. It's like I'm the one geek in the world who happened to see that, but he couldn't have been nicer. He was great.
He was great, and you know what? Next time you run into him, you now have something else in common. Everything old is
That's
new.
right. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. What do you think of those guys?
I'm sure he'll remember us.
Now let's go inside the writers' room, because I've heard so many things about the show of shows writers' room and how that worked and all, but I never hear anything about any other television show how it works. So for us that are uninitiated, is there a room with the writers that hang out? Are you given tasks to do on your own in a different room? How does it work with respect to, basically, I know this is a tough question, but just generally speaking, the writers' room, what goes on there?
Well, every room is kind of different. They're all similar in that, ultimately the object is to get all the writers together and ultimately end up with a TV show at the end of it. How you get there is very different, and that all depends on the showrunner. The Sopranos writers' room was actually a room. It was a big conference room in Silver Cup Studios in Long Island City. That conference room overlooked the 59th Street Bridge with this incredible view of Manhattan across the river. And, we all had, there was a big bullpen area outside that, and then we all had our own individual offices around that bullpen. But the writer's room itself, we would generally get together around 10 a.m., we had a kitchen, and everybody would have their coffee and bagels or whatever, and we'd get together in the writer's room and start our day. It's interesting. I always said this about the writer's room for Sopranos, particularly, that if you came in on any given day and just observed for a couple of hours, you would swear we were not ever talking about the show. It was a lot of storytelling, a lot of joking, a lot of ball breaking, a lot of one time this happened to me, or I had the craziest dream the other night. And, what would happen, and this was all encouraged by David, eventually we would get around to, wow, that's interesting. What if that happened to Tony, or et cetera? Or, a news story. A good example is, for years we always been reading about these stories about black bears coming out of the woods in New Jersey and terrorizing homeowners and going through garbage cans. And we always thought, wow, that would be really interesting to do, but we could never figure out when to do it. And then finally in season 5, Tony and Carmela were estranged, and somebody brought up the idea, like, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if the bear now came, Tony's not living at home and his family's being terrorized by a bear. He'd feel really guilty and he'd really want to be involved, but he's not there. And then it was also, now that he's more or less a single man, he started stalking Melfi again, badgering her for a date. So the episode became Two Tonys, which is really, two bears. The one of the bears is stalking Melfi, that's the actual Tony, and then an actual bear is stalking Carmela. There's a line of dialogue where he says there are two Tony Sopranos, but it's really about, basically Melfi's got her bear that's coming around, and Carmela's got her real bear. So, things like that would ultimately become story ideas. Or, sometimes, very often I would tell a story, and months later David would call me up and say, what was that story again you told me about your sister and the time you went somewhere? And I would retell it to him, and then it would pop up in an episode. Like he'd never forget anything he told. So it was very much like that. Also just in terms of the nuts and bolts, at the beginning of a season, David would come in with a broad stroke idea of what the season would be. What would Tony's storyline be? Very, very basic. Something like Tony meets a girl in therapy, they start dating, it turns out she's got real severe mental problems, and it doesn't end well. That's just as basic as that. And Uncle Junior gets sick, he's diagnosed with cancer, he thinks he's going to die, he ends up getting well. Just those things. And then we start, all right, well, how do we start with episode 1? What happens? And then just talk for days on end until we had an outline. Once we would get an outline, one of the writers would be assigned to go off and take that outline and actually write the script, and then it became your script. And then you would also produce it, which meant, there were many different kinds of producing. The producing the writers did was more creative and variety, where you'd be responsible for all the creative meetings, the hair meeting, the makeup meeting, the stunt meeting, the location scouting with the director, casting. Then you'd be on the set for the entire shoot. And at that point, you come back into the writer's room and continue, and then somebody else would be up down in the barrel doing their episode.
Wow, I had no idea that the writer had so much responsibility just beyond, writing the script, coming up with the idea. It went well beyond that.
All of the writers on The Sopranos were also producers as well, so it was often you'd cover the set for your own episode, and sometimes for other people's episodes as well. And you'd be on the set from 6 in the morning till midnight. Then as the week progressed, the shooting schedule would change because you'd start later and later in the day. Sometimes you wouldn't start on Friday till 2 in the afternoon because you need it's called a turnaround. There has to be a certain number of hours from when you wrap until when you start again, because people need to have legally need to have time to sleep and see their family. So sometimes on Fridays we wouldn't start till 2, sometimes 4 in the afternoon. And that meant you'd go till 6 in the morning. So it was a long day. I mean, you basically live with these people. I think a lot of people who want to be in the movie business aren't really sure what they're asking for. If you're going to be on a movie crew, you forget about seeing your family during the week ever again, because you're going to be working till 10 at night every night at least.
Wow.
And then your weekend often won't start until Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and then your call time on Monday at 6 a.m. So it's it looks and sounds glamorous, and it is occasionally, but like I said, you want to be on a movie crew, you're talking about a very different lifestyle.
Well, now you have something, David?
I was going to ask another kind of specific question about the show. As a big fan, one of the questions I always had was, when the series started, a lot of it was about Tony's relationship with his mother, and the actress who played his mother passed away, unfortunately. I don't know if that was during your time on the staff for officially, but I was always curious as to what how that changed the direction of the show, and I assume that was supposed to be sort of a story arc that would be continuing from season to season. Can you talk a little bit about what happened at that point?
Yeah, I mean, Nancy Marchand, who was absolutely lovely, played Tony's mom, and she had been ill throughout the entire run of the show, even during season 1, as far as I understand, even though I didn't come on until season 2. We didn't know how ill she was, as it turned out. So, when I met her in season 2, she would come to set when she needed to work, and then she would leave quickly. There wasn't a lot of hanging out. She didn't dawdle. She came in, did her scenes and then went home. So I didn't really get to talk to her a lot. But when I did, she was absolutely could not have been nicer. She was an absolutely lovely woman. So when season 3 came along, we were plotting out, the season, a large part of which, it revolved around Nancy's character. And then very early on in the writing, we got the sad news that she had passed away. So that kind of changed the direction of her storylines for the year, whatever they were going to be. Then the question became, okay, well, how do we deal with Livia's death? It quickly became apparent to everybody that there was only one person who could write that episode, and that was David. I mean, that character was based on his own mother. And I think there was a reluctance on his part initially to do it. And I said, me and the other writers, like, well, David, no one else can write this. I mean, who better to write this than you? And I think it was emotional and painful for him. And I knew he wanted to frame the episode around the movie Public Enemy, which featured a very different mother, to a gangster. The Jimmy Cagney's mother in that movie was this doting Irish mother who absolutely adored her son. And I remember screening that in the writer's room, while we were plotting out the episode where Tony's mom dies. And it was really emotional at the end. I don't know if you remember the movie, but his rivals have kidnapped him, and they call the mother and say, "Oh, we're going to bring him home," and she's thrilled. "Oh, finally, I'm going to get my boy back." And basically, they dump his dead body on her doorstep, and she's hysterical, crying. And it's when you watch it, in the context, if you really let the emotion hit you, it's really emotional. We tend to watch old movies like, oh, it's kind of goofy and it's Jimmy Cagney, but if you really let yourself get invested, it's really poignant. And certainly when David wrapped dancing around Tony's mother's death, and then had Tony watch that scene. Here's this mother who absolutely loves her son, and is, hysterical, that he's dead. I mean, it became really emotional for Jim acting in, and for Tony certainly. And it was a beautiful, beautiful episode. I think David just nailed it, and certainly Jim Gandolfini was incredible in it.
And we're having an incredible time with Terry Winter talking about The Sopranos. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again. One more segment. We're going to dive into some more Sopranos discussion and more. So stay tuned. Come on back. Diagnosis Murder theme. Look at that.
That's great. Another highlight of my ride.
There you go.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, this is Walter Koenig, and you're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
This is Bernie Coppell, also known as Siegfried from Get Smart. You are listening to Everything Old is New Again. You understand? Good.
We're pulling out all stops here to impress Terry Winter.
That is awesome, man. That is so great. So much Bernie Capel, so much more interesting as that character than any other he's ever done.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt.
That's so great. Fun. That's so great.
We're on Everything Old is New Again here talking to Terrance Winter about Sopranos and all things entertainment. As usual, having a great time. I'm going to just ask you, because at the end of last segment, we played a little bit of Diagnosis Murder. You did write for that show a little bit. I'm sure it was a little different than The Sopranos. The question I have is, Dick Van Dyke, did you have any interaction with him? I know every show's different, so you may not have had interaction with writers there.
I wrote a freelance episode of Diagnosis Murder, which at the time was being run by good friends of mine, Lee Goldberg and Bill Rapkin, who were absolutely wonderful mystery writers, particularly. They're great writers in general, but particularly really, really great mystery writers. I wrote with them on the Cosby Mysteries, and that was their forte. And they were kind enough to assign me a freelance episode to write, which I did, and they were very kind. I'll put it that way. They helped me quite a bit on that show. And I wrote my episode, and then I came down to watch some of the filming, and I got to meet Dick Van Dyke one day. Couldn't have been nicer. And it's funny. He's one of those guys where you grow up, he just feels like you know him. You've seen him on TV, and he's so avuncular, and you watch the Dick Van Dyke show, and he just feels like a guy you grew up with, and you hope, when I realized I'm going to meet him, I just like, oh God, I hope he's not a jerk,
right?
Because you just really want him to be what you think he is, and he was. He was so nice. He could not have been more kind, and just like always a smile on his face, and just could not have been more lovely. And it was great because again, you grew up as a fan, and you just want the people, you want your idols to be what you think they are,
right?
And that was certainly, like, I always say that about Martin Scorsese. He was exactly what I hoped, and still is. Just a great guy.
And the thing is that you have a lot of knowledge of, like we do, and we sometimes think it's useless, but it's not, of pop culture. You throw in references to songs, TV shows, music, I should say movies as well, into and different characters from movies into a lot of your writing. I presume, of course, that's something you do on purpose. And again, explain to us a little bit why you would bring into little references of different things like Knucklehead Smurf or whatever into the Sopranos episodes.
Well, it's just real, growing up. I don't think this is exclusive to the East Coast or anywhere we grew up. It's just pop culture is just such a frame of reference for everybody that, we all will say somebody reminds us of somebody else, or, he thinks he's so cool, he's like Fonzie, this guy, like whatever it is. We all have the same touchstones, too. So it's a shorthand, to sort of, pull out a character from a cartoon or a movie or a TV series and just sort of drop those references. And I know, it's funny, a lot of the guys who, are in the mob, are also big fans of mob movies. They're sort of very self-referential. So they've all seen the Godfather series. They've all seen every movie Scorsese's ever done, certainly the mob movie. It's so funny. I mean, I've been with Martin Scorsese where young guys will come up to him and go, "Oh, man, I could quote every one of your movies," and Marty will go, "Oh, really? So you're a big fan of The Age of Innocence?"
Yeah, right.
And they're like, no, Goodfellas. He's like, yeah, I get it. But, it's so those guys, again, even it got to the point on The Sopranos where when they would talk about Godfather, they just say, in one, such and such happened, or in two, it was like such a shorthand that if you didn't know what they were talking about, you'd be lost. But, you just pick it up immediately. Oh, they're talking about The Godfather. Yeah, for me, it's just, again, it's every day in my daily life, I'm either quoting a movie or a TV show or referencing a character from something, and most of the people around me get it.
Okay, so speaking of pop culture and the indelible mark Sopranos has made on it, I have to ask the question because I'm sure every Sopranos fan is asking the question and never got resolved. Is Tony Soprano dead?
That's a great question, and I don't know, and I don't know that it was ever meant to be resolved. I mean, I think and I don't know because I didn't write it, but I think it's safe to say that if you think he is, he is, and if you think he's not, he's not. If that sounds like a cop out, I apologize.
So
but what I always talked about, what I always talk about taking away from that episode was that moment was that look, if he's not, eventually somebody's going to walk out of a bathroom one night and kill this guy. That was what I took from that. It might have happened that night. It's going to happen some point. You don't live that life. You don't be Tony Soprano and get to go out with ice cream with your family and not worry about things. You're always looking around. Right. Who's that guy? Why is that guy standing there? It's always this suspicion of, this is the life you've created for yourself. You reap what you sow, and you are reaping the benefits of a lifetime of crime where your best friend could put one in your head, and you just don't know. And that maybe it was that night, maybe not. Right. So
there were rumors around before the unfortunate passing of James Gandolfini that there was going to be possibly a Sopranos movie. How real was that? If you were involved with that at all, can you discuss that?
I was always aware that was something that, certainly David was approached to do a movie every day since The Sopranos ended. They just, and with, the success of movies like the Sex and the City movies, and I think they did, what was the thing with Scully and Mulder, X-Files movies. I think there's obviously it's a huge brand. I think David resisted it for a really long time. I don't know if it ever got to the point where he talked about it with Jim. We certainly always talked about the idea, well, if he did do it, it would have to be a prequel because so many of the main characters are dead. And certainly now the movie is happening. So, and of course it is a prequel. So, but it's going to feature, a cast of people playing our characters as younger men, including James Gandolfini's son Michael playing Tony, right, which is very exciting.
Now, what's the future of Terrance Winter? We're waiting with bated breath here for the next project, if there's something you can speak about.
Yeah, sure. I'm developing a few TV projects, one of which is a series for Apple, who's getting into the entertainment business in a big way, based on a book called Havana Nocturne by T.J. English. It's a book, it's a nonfiction book, really terrific, New York Times bestseller about the mob in Cuba during the rise of Fidel Castro. So it's basically, if you remember Godfather 2, those scenes in Cuba that were kind of fictionalized, this is the real story of Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano and all those guys, basically planting a flag in Cuba and sort of taking over the casino industry. It was sort of the golden age of Havana, between like 1946 to 59. And, while they were doing that, there was this young kid in college named Fidel Castro, who was sort of giving his first public speeches and sort of becoming politically aware. And he and Lansky were kind of on a collision course for about 10 years. And I won't give away the ending, but it's pretty cool. So doing that, and then a few movie projects. I wrote a movie called Murder Machine based on a great book by Gene Mustaine and Jerry Capisi about a psychotic mob crew in Brooklyn in the 80s, led by a guy named Roy DeMeo. That I'm doing for a company called Film Nation. We've got a great director named Greg Mottola who just came on board. And my wife and I are also producing a LeBron James biopic. It's about LeBron and his 4 friends growing up in Akron, Ohio, as kids, and how sort of they all came together. It's an amazing sports story, directed by a guy named Chris Robinson, and we're really excited about that as well.
Oh, that's all exciting stuff.
I just want to say, just interrupt
sure.
1 second. Speaking about pop culture, if for some reason in any of these projects or in the future you need to have Everything Old is New Again playing in the background, you have our consent to do so.
Absolutely, I'll keep that in mind.
Or if you need an after show, Doug and I would be happy to get the fans' interest up. Yeah.
Cool. Love it.
So anyway, just something else, David? Or I have something here real quick. You work with... Oops, I played that by mistake. We'll cut that. You work with David Chase. Now, before... You got to know him pretty well, obviously. Before Sopranos, he was involved in a show that's a little bit of... underground show that people from the 70s remember, Kolchak the Night Stalker with Darren McGarry.
Yeah.
Did you ever speak to him about that experience and what that was about, or did you just always speak about Sopranos with him?
No. We talked about everything. Yeah, no, he loved working on that show. It was really great, and it was really, I think, kind of odd stories, and they'd always have to come up with these really oddball. It was sort of like a forerunner to the X-Files in a way. I think Darren McGarren's character was a reporter. I believe, who would go out and, dig out these crazy stories about aliens or monsters and vampires and stuff like that. And I know David had a lot of fun writing on it because it was just coming up with these insane, storylines about these, sci-fi-ish kinds of characters. So I know that had a huge cult following. He also worked very famously on the Rockford Files for a long time, which was one of his first big shows that he did, so in which he really absolutely loved working on that show as well.
That's great. We've enjoyed very much having Terrance Winter sharing behind the scenes of The Sopranos, celebrating 20 years of The Sopranos. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best with these projects. When one of them comes out, maybe we'll be happy. Certainly we'll be happy. Maybe we'll be lucky enough to have you come back and talk about one of these projects.
Absolutely. I would be happy to do it. That sounds great.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time, Terry. Appreciate it.
You got it, guys. Great talking to both of you.
Excellent. Good luck. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. Go. We'll be back. And Everything Old is New again next week. Talk all things pop culture, entertainment. You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.